On May 20th, Thomas Halbert uploaded a video to YouTube called Finally Coming Clean. In the video, he goes into detail about where his headspace has been since the scandal several months ago through the present, with the goal of addressing the elephant in the room as far as his channel is concerned. He describes his health issues stemming from his eating disorder escalating whilst exiting a toxic relationship in which he felt trapped, experiencing panic attacks, loss of sleep, shaking, and passing out due to low blood sugar, resulting in emergency room visits. This continued into the scandal, which happened 2 weeks later, where he describes his actions as poking his nose where it shouldn't have been, and playing all sides possible, causing him of course to become tangled in the web spun by his ego, the weight of which leaving him to remain jaded for so long, whilst others involved were able to move on long ago. The aftermath of the scandal caused the previous issues to worsen, but were also exemplary of, and fuel for, patterns of self-sabotage inherent to his behavior, followed by a chilling detailing of a suicide attempt. Perhaps this is 2020 hindsight, but I feel this video is somewhat inevitable in the sense that he has alluded to these ideas in various videos past, but has never allowed himself to be vulnerable, which suggests to me that his ego still had its grasp over his ability to process the situation at the time. In a way, certain topics were always met with some degree of sarcastic tone, or what some might consider deflection. For example, in his video Answering Your Assumptions About Me, he described his revelations about his sexuality, moving to New York City, expanding to Twitch, changes to his content, as well as other exciting yet undetailed projects in his future. Now, obviously given the DMs between a certain other beauty influencer and a waiter, I'm not going to touch Thomas's revelations of his sexuality with a 10-foot pole, let alone address them directly, as that's not only besides the point, but also not my place. However, grouping things broadly, I will say that given the information presented in Finally Coming Clean, specifically that of the toxic relationship, visiting his home of South Carolina as a means of both evading and breaking up with this person, as well as escaping an environment in which he felt so many negative connotations, and the alienation of both his friends and the beauty community, as well as his audience, do perhaps give different context to his responses to assumptions presented in that previous video. What strikes me the most about this video over others dealing with similar subject matter is that in contrast with previous mentions, he does not attempt here to frame the negative results of his actions through the lens of "why did this happen to me?", but rather takes ownership of them. Paralleling the scandal, where he describes having played every angle he could before stringing himself in his own web, here too, he seems to have beat around the bush in numerous ways before finally succumbing to the weight of his actions. The difference here being that he's accepted the repercussions, as the weight has left a more prominent impression. In that respect, it's almost as if the situation has played out twice, once externally, followed by once internally. In terms of putting his ego, pride, and self-worth into his job, creativity, and what he does, although I don't agree with defining people purely by what they do, when it comes to the creative fields, traces of ourselves are left in and on what we create. I think of the product of creative activity as being a sort of encapsulation of how the creator's mind navigates certain problems and constraints, and thus can be very telling. Coupled with the investments in time, money, energy, and mental capacity a creator puts into their work, results in an almost indescribable connection with the work as being a, for lack of a better term, part or extension of the creator in some capacity. So when he says it is that attitude which led him to be the person we heard in the voice memos Jeffree Star posted, I think it's important to differentiate between one's work being an extension of who they are and allowing the quantifiable success of that work to define their self-worth. The latter issue being what I think Thomas is, in slightly different words, actually describing here. As for what he says about the shady character we've seen in videos past, I think it's much the same idea with other variables at play. Whether or not a YouTuber puts on some form of persona for the camera, the content being made is ultimately a reflection of some part of themselves, but eventually, as seems to have been the case for Thomas, it is when people latch on to certain qualities of that character they collectively empathize with, in combination with an unhealthy fixation on the quantifiable definitions of success that can cause one, as it did for him, to morph into a caricature of themselves. and in his case, perhaps also lose grasp of his true sense of self. I will admit I have followed Thomas for a while, and in ways see qualities present in myself in him as well. That's not to say I agree with all his past choices, rather that I might be too readily empathetic towards his expressed struggles. Even still, I find this video to be a promising step and look forward to seeing what he does as he implements changes to his content and to himself.